There is a world of blinding white snow that few of us know anything about. A frozen world, primitive, cold, and unforgiving. Hello, I'm Jean-Michel Cousteau, and in this episode of Stories of the Sea, you'll meet an astonishing variety of warm-blooded animals who are flourishing in these frigid polar regions. From the magnificent polar bears of the Arctic to the emperor penguins of the Antarctic. We'll show you how these icebound animals have adapted themselves to the punishing realities of sub-zero temperatures. They are the creatures of the ice.
At the top of the world, stretching north beyond the limits of the tundra, is a vast area of glaciers, ice floes, and frozen sea. Along the northern shore of the Hudson Bay, near a place called Kelly's Bay, the sun rises. For the next several months, the sun will remain in the sky and never set. Here, near the Arctic Circle, in this vast desert of snow and ice, there's very little outward signs of life, not even trees, plants, or grass. The magic of the Arctic fascinated many early explorers. Their wooden ships were often captured by the ice, crushed by the shifting floes. But they were not the last compelled to try to conquer the pole. The great Arctic explorer, Robert Peary, prepared his whole life to achieve this goal of reaching the North Pole first. After years of battling broken ice packs, blizzards, and dragging heavy sleds over pressure ridges, he achieved his goal on April 6, 1909. The hazards of flying in the polar region against the Arctic elements was overwhelming. Many famous explorers lost their lives attempting to fly over the desolate ice cap. 15 years after Robert Peary's surface expedition to the pole, Commander Richard Byrd attempted the same trip by air, using a twin-engine monoplane. The 600-mile journey was a daring feat, a risk similar to the manned moon missions some 40 years later. Byrd reached his goal on May 9, 1926. He circled the fog-shrouded pole 3 times before returning to his home base. The first Arctic explorers noted in their journals finding a surprising amount of wildlife living in the Great White North. They were soon followed by hunters, whalers, and sealers looking for fresh hunting grounds. Throughout the 1800s, millions of walrus were killed as fur traders brutally slaughtered them for their ivory tusks. The native people who lived in the frozen north depended on these animals, not for money, greed, or fashion, but for their very survival. For centuries, the native Eskimos depended on the walrus for their survival and culture. Because of their habit of gathering together in large herds, they were easy prey. The Eskimos also used boats called umiaks for hunting. A frame made out of bone or wood was covered with seal or walrus skins, then waterproofed. These people of the north, the Eskimos, live and play in one of the most cruel environments in the world. These scenes show a people in a time far removed from modern life. Within the last 30 years, snowmobiles have replaced dog sleds. Children have started going to school to learn the skills of the modern age. Life has become comfortable, and the old culture of the Eskimo has begun disappearing. Just a few decades ago, the Eskimos lived a wandering life. They did not have permanent homes. In winter, they built igloos of earth and stone. In summer, they lived in tents made of animal skins. In this bleak environment, these people cleverly used any resource they could find. The famous ice igloo or snow house was used as a shelter during hunts. They were built out of the most readily available material, ice. They selected ice with the correct consistency, not too hard or too soft. They carved blocks into the proper shape and thickness. Inside, the igloos protected them from the wind and bitter cold. Heat came from lamps that burned animal fat. Still, the temperature rarely rose above freezing. In order to help keep their bodies warm, the Eskimos consumed a constant supply of food. The children especially needed to eat as much as possible in order to receive enough calories, not only to stay warm, but to grow strong and healthy as well. The family has always been the center of Eskimo life, and the family was key to their mutual survival. Each individual depended on the other to be able to live in this unforgiving world. Everyone worked and contributed if the group as a whole was to survive. Despite their environment, the Eskimo people are some of the happiest in the world. They never overlook or take for granted the simple things that nature has put on this earth for all to enjoy. One positive aspect of living in such a brutal environment was that the Eskimos actually benefited from the extreme cold, as it acted as a unique natural barrier against the most common diseases. Like many New World people, the Eskimo population numbered in the hundreds of thousands before the appearance of the Europeans. But when European hunters arrived in the 17th century, searching for seals and whales, they brought with them the diseases the Eskimo had for centuries avoided. Their population was nearly wiped out. Wave after wave of Old World epidemics swept through their population to where only a few thousand survived. In most cultures, the family dog is a lovable pet. But in the far north, the children of the Eskimos know that these animals are a means of transportation. The young boys learned early how to crack the whip. In a search for food, a team of 15 to 20 huskies were hitched up to a single sled in preparation for a hunt. For at least 5,000 years, the Eskimos followed the creatures of the ice, wandering across the ice sheets in search of food. With little wildlife above the ice, the hunters would use their skill and experience to select a spot in the ice and hack out an open access to the ocean. The ocean provides the creatures of the ice a food source, and in turn, the Eskimos hunt these animals, which were a rich source of protein for their families. Lowering down a hook with bait through the hole in the ice, the Eskimo quickly pulls up a fish on the line. Skilled hunters learn to watch for a natural hole in the ice. A seal might use as a breathing hole. They might wait for hours until the unlucky seal pokes its nose above the water for its last breath. Back at the igloo village, the women and the children would eagerly await the return of the hunting party. The children played games much as they did the same all over the world, such as hide and seek. But it could be a little more difficult here in the Arctic when there are no trees or bushes to hide behind. Once the hunters arrived back in camp, there was little time spent before everyone enjoyed the fruits of the hunt. Most Eskimos ate their food raw. Both meat and fish were consumed without wasting any energy cooking. Before the arrival of Christian missionaries, the Eskimos practiced a religion where all things, the rocks, the snow, even the air, had a spirit. Those traditions have mostly disappeared. Christian Mass took the place of pagan ceremonies in most Eskimo villages. One ancient ceremony that has not changed over the years, and that is the celebration of a successful hunt. It was the Greeks who called the star above the North Point Arctus, the bear. The only other hunter to challenge man's rule in this world of drifting ice is the polar bear. Solitary hunters, these great Arctic bears sometimes spend their entire life on the ice pack, searching for food. Powerful and agile, they are the largest of all bears. A fully grown male can weigh more than 1,600 pounds. He's a strong swimmer who can remain for hours in the freezing Arctic Sea. A thick layer of fat, along with his famous white fur, protects him from the howling wind and temperatures as low as 65 degrees below zero. The bear's favorite prey is a seal, which it hunts with relentless efficiency. Scientists have been studying the polar bear for decades. Flying low over the ice fields, they immobilize the bears with tranquilizing darts, making sure they are fully sedated before they land and approach on foot. Once threatened with extinction, the polar bear population has increased over the last 30 years thanks to government protection and management. The bears are tagged and measured, noting the date and location where each animal is found. The census tells us about the bear's migrating habits. Polar bear cubs are usually born on land in snow dens. They stay with their mother through the winter, wandering across the Arctic learning to hunt. The male bear plays no role in the rearing of his offspring. By the age of 2, the cubs weigh more than 200 pounds and will soon separate from their mother. A number of the polar bear's neighbors live below the stark white of the ice. Whales drawn by the Arctic Ocean's rich supply of plankton thrive here. The Arctic whale, the narwhal, is also known as the unicorn whale. The narwhal has a 9-foot tooth protruding from its head like a horn. The Vikings hunted narwhal and sold their tusks as unicorn horns to the princes and kings of Europe and the Middle East. Because the narwhal lives in the inaccessible Arctic Sea, the narwhal-unicorn connection remained a secret for hundreds of years. Further south, we encounter another small whale, the beluga, or white whale. The beluga is the narwhal's closest relative, and like his cousin, he thrives in the Arctic Sea. As you can see, the beluga is a gregarious and curious fellow. He uses his powerful fluke to push himself forward for a better look. But because they swim only about 10 knots, they are also part of the chain of life, as they are preyed upon by the more aggressive orca, or killer whales. We've caught this pod of orcas close to shore as they hunt and play together. Found in every ocean from the Arctic ice to the continent of Antarctica, the orcas roam worldwide. The orca's diet is made up of fish, squid, seal, and other whales, like the beluga. While they spend most of their time hunting in coastal waters, orcas like to play. Racing around just below the surface, they leap out of the water in a spectacular display of power and agility. The females give birth to a single calf, usually in November or December, after a 12-month pregnancy. The calf stays close to its mother before reaching maturity. Another resident of the far north is the walrus. The walrus depends on the 3-inch folds of fat or blubber around his neck and back to stay warm. The fat protects the animal's vital organs from heat loss. The walrus spends most of their time jostling, bellowing, and most of all scratching their itchy skin. Most of the day they can be found sleeping on rocky beaches or ice floes. They are rarely alone as they seek the comfort of others. Like newlyweds on their honeymoon, they cuddle together on the broken ice packs. As we head south, we encounter the gray whale, who spends the summer in the Arctic waters taking their fill before beginning their great southern migration to their breeding waters off the coast of Mexico. Moving to the extreme south, we head to the southern hemisphere and reach the opposite end of the world. The Greeks, who named the North Pole Arctis, called the far opposite pole Antarctis. They imagined a great mysterious land of strange beasts, where the laws of nature would be reversed. For thousands of years, as man conquered every area of land in the rest of the world, no one ever saw Antarctica. James Cook crossed the Antarctic Circle and circumnavigated the Antarctic. In his journal, he mentioned seeing large numbers of seals and whales in the waters. Whaling ships from Europe and America began investigating these new hunting areas. The murderous hunt of seals and whales carried ships farther and farther south. Captain John Davis wrote in his ship's log, "Saw a large bay, the land high and covered entirely with snow. I think this southern land to be a continent." In 1837, American naval officer Charles Wilkes, on mission to develop naval maps and charts, journeyed to the southern oceans. On January 30th, 1840, after viewing a range of snow-covered mountains from his ship, Wilkes noted in his log, "We saw the land gradually rising beyond the ice, and know that all were convinced of its existence. I gave the land the name of the Antarctic continent." 70% of the Earth's fresh water is locked in these great ice sheets, up to 3 miles thick. Here at the southern pole, in this land of rock and ice, a number of remarkable creatures have adapted to the harshest of environments. Imagine spending most of your life lying on slabs of ice on a frozen sea. Weddell seals are one of the few species of animals that live here year-round. A nursery of female Weddells gathered along the edges of the ice to nurse their pups. The young seals can gain as much as 15 pounds a day. A seal is more at home in the warmer waters beneath the ice than above it. The seal must keep the small holes in the ice from freezing over, so they can feed underwater. They use their upper teeth to rasp their way through the ice to cut a breathing hole. A distant cousin to the walrus, their blood carries so much oxygen that it can hold its breath for over an hour, allowing it to hunt at depths of nearly 2,000 feet. This pup, born a few weeks ago, is now ready to learn how to swim. His mother gently entices him into the water. The young mother gives her pup a nuzzle and a hug to show her approval. Nearly all of Antarctica is covered with ice. On the few spots that are ice-free, the Adelie penguins lay their eggs. This female Adelie calls out to her mate. Out of the thousands of other calls, he can distinguish hers from all others. The pair build their nests out of the only material around, stones. But in Antarctica, even stones are in short supply. The penguin on land is a comical sight. Their black and white dinner jacket looks, along with their waddling steps, make them entertaining to watch. They may look silly, but they live in a place of extremes. They are incredibly tough animals, laying their eggs in this, the coldest part of the world. Both parents share in the raising of the chicks. Lashed by sub-zero winds, the male tends to the eggs. The female, who's been feeding at sea, returns to feed the newly hatched chicks. She spoils the young birds, filling their bellies with shrimp and fish. The male must travel a great distance to reach the sea and feed for the first time in months. Somewhere near the nesting sites, a leopard seal waits. 1,000 pounds of muscle and teeth designed to rip flesh. The leopard seal hunts for penguins. A clever hunter, the leopard seal swims beneath the ice, watching for the penguin's shadow moving across the ice pack. When the birds cross a thin layer, the hunter crashes through the ice and grabs the frightened birds. With the danger past, the penguins continue on their way to the sea. Clumsy on land, penguins are graceful creatures in the water. With speed and agility, they propel themselves through the water by flapping their wings. They thrust themselves out of the water and take a breath without interrupting their progress. In a technique that resembles that of a porpoise, they can reach speeds of nearly 20 miles an hour. Professor Gerald Koeman of Scripps Institution of Oceanography has traveled to Antarctica for more than 35 years. Professor Koeman's research focuses on the behavior and physiology of emperor penguins. In Scripps Hydraulics Laboratory, Professor Koeman measures the metabolic rate and gas exchange of the bird as it swims. When British explorer Captain Scott reached the South Pole in 1911, he discovered that Captain Roald Amundsen had been there just 4 weeks before him, on December the 14th. On their return journey, after 700 miles and just 11 miles from safety, a blizzard stopped Scott and the rest of his party. Edmund Wilson, a member of the Scott party, when it was clear they would not survive, wrote, "I honestly believe that God's will was being worked out for us in what we were doing here. If it is right to search out His works in one corner of His creation, it is surely right for some of us to go to the ends of the earth to search." With their frozen bodies were found 60 pounds of rock samples which they had dragged with them. The samples Scott's party brought back contributed to our further understanding of the South Pole. Men like Captain Scott and those who followed him worked at the very edge of what was then known. The lessons they learned were sometimes very hard. The quest for knowledge and serious scientific research, started by James Cook, Captain Scott, and others, laid the groundwork for Project Deep Freeze, begun in 1956. Deep Freeze was the establishment of a permanent scientific research base located at McMurdo Sound along the Ross Sea. Over the years, here and at other research stations, scientists have worked to understand the polar regions. Many clues to the health of our planet have been found here. What scientists have discovered is that this once pristine environment is no longer free of pollution or contamination. 30 years ago, scientists began finding pesticides, heavy metals, and even radioactive fallout in the ice. They discovered that deep-sea currents have carried waste from the heavily populated parts of the world to these remote waters. In 1987, British scientists discovered a hole above Antarctica in the protective layer of gas in the upper atmosphere called the ozone. The ultraviolet light it screens out is harmful to life on Earth. Research on ice core samples revealed gases trapped in the ice thousands of years ago. Comparing those samples with more recent studies shows that the atmosphere of the planet itself is changing. Even small changes in the Earth's temperature would cause melting of the ice caps, causing flooding in many cities and low-lying areas. The polar regions are also the source of the world's weather systems. If we are changing the nature of the planet, the polar regions and the animals that live there will be one of the first to be affected. These are only some of the many reasons why research at the poles is so important. As we learn more and add to our understanding of these frozen frontiers, we begin to see how we are affecting our world. With this knowledge, we begin to understand our planet and our place on it.
Though these animals have adapted themselves to such harsh extremes, there is even harsher extreme they cannot adapt to, and that's pollution. The polar regions are no longer pollution-free. Toxic waste have actually been found in the bodies of polar bears and Arctic foxes. The chemical era has destroyed some marine ecosystems beyond their ability to recover. And now, it's threatening to destroy the very top of the food chain, us. I urge all of you now to take an active role in preserving the future of our seas. It is, in the end, the very future of our planet. I'm Jean-Michel Cousteau, and this is Stories of the Sea.